The book that we're talking about this evening, Viral Hate, is really about the dark side of the internet. And I think we're all familiar with some of the issues that are involved. And this book is a very clearly written and a very practical guide in many ways. A very interesting book and very helpful book, and talks about some of the dilemmas about dealing with the kind of bias, hatred, bullying, and various sites that are on the internet. And as I mentioned to Abe just before, I've just been working on a story very much on my mind the last couple of days, and just coming out actually tonight, tomorrow. And involves someone who claims to be a rabbi, it's unclear or not, but who has been accused of being a predator or even a rapist for many years. And part of his modus operandi was to use the internet, to use websites, to use email in ways that were very dangerous. And the irony is that part of the reason that this is coming out now is because there's a website that identifies people like this, and several of the women who have been victims of his have come forward. So you see some of the positives and the negatives of this internet that's become such an important part of all our lives. So, Abe, if you can talk a little bit, maybe as a way of beginning, just what prompted you to write the book now, and what you feel is the main message to get across.
Technological developments, revolutions have impacted way beyond the technology. The advent of the printing press, the advent of the telegraph, they've all had impact on civilization, society, how they interact, how they communicate with each other. And this modern day communication revolution began to impact on our segment of concern in this society, which is hate, bigotry, prejudice, and racism. And as you indicate, it's all not black and white. It's not all on one side. But our perspective, our mandate, our responsibility is to focus on that which threatens civility, threatens respect, threatens relationship. And so we began to see early on how this new miracle of communication, of interaction, of education, of information was quickly being abused by the bigots. And it grew very quickly like a tsunami. And from the paradigm that our community, this country, has grown, which is the respect of freedom of speech. And the paradigm has always been, how do you deal with freedom? How do you deal with hate speech? How do you deal with bad speech? Well, under the guise and under the protection and under the embrace of the First Amendment, you answer bad speech with good speech. Somebody writes a bad column, you write a good column. Somebody writes an editorial you don't like, you write a letter. And that, for many, many years, has basically served us all well. Well, all of a sudden, we wake up as a community, as a country, with a tsunami of hate. A tsunami of hate messaging, communications throughout the globe. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with when you still continue to embrace that which is so important in our value system, which is the First Amendment? And so, as the first thing, Harry, we decided we need to alert the public to understand that while it has all these wonderful things, it has a dark underbelly. It's become a superhighway for bigotry, for racism, for hatred. And we need to struggle with how do you deal with it. Going beyond, if you will, the Jewish community, but our society, it has already destroyed privacy. How much we value privacy, how much we've dealt with privacy, how much we've protected privacy. Privacy is basically gone with the advent of the internet. And what we're beginning to see more and more is the loss of civility. In a very simple way, the less people talk to each other, the more uncivil they are. It's too simplistic, but in a major way, it says it all. Much easier. Well, the example that you used earlier in terms of the seduction, the raping, etc., which can operate so easily, if you will, through the internet. That's the bad part. The good part is probably if not for the internet, the victims would have not have come forward. What price are we paying for the good versus the bad?
So you and I have talked a little bit about how that civility issue has affected our whole society. And I see it most narrowly, I guess, in terms of the Jewish community and over issues that are difficult issues, whether it's about Israel. Israel used to be the great unifier in the Jewish community. Now it's one of those third rail issues. Rabbis tell me they don't talk about it in their sermons. It's so divisive. How much of that do you think is brought on by this kind of? I think part of it is ideological, where people on either side feel that the issue of Israel is so important that it's okay to demonize the other side because it's so dangerous if they would prevail. But some of it is allowed to happen because of the technology.
Right. Gary, it's hard to quantify what the cause and effect is, but there's no question that there is a cause and effect. Extremism has always been with us. In the past, again, it's been limited in terms of its ability to move and communicate. Look, when we dealt with extremist publications in the past, going beyond for a moment, the issue that you're relating to, all right, it used to be brown paper bags that they used to mail it in. They would hide it. They would find surreptitious ways of communicating it. Today, that same bigotry, that same ugliness, it just flows out there. Now, we have extremism, we have differences of opinion, but I think the fact that everybody today has a megaphone, that everybody can now broadcast his views globally is an incentive. It's an incentive, but there's another element which partially plays and partially doesn't play in terms of Jewish extremism, and that's anonymity. We're finding that a great incentive in communicating hate, lack of civility, disrespect, prejudice, anti-Semitism, is the fact that you can hide today under this cloak of anonymity. I've had debates and discussions with newspaper editors when I travel around the country, usually try to have a meeting with the editorial board, and I still have not received an adequate answer. And the question basically is, I write a letter to the Palm Beach Post on a subject usually of our concern. Before you publish my letter, you will call me, you will check whether I exist, sometimes for political reasons, philosophical reasons, or space reasons. You'll even negotiate with me a sentence or two or a paragraph. And only after you're satisfied that I'm legitimate will you publish my letter. I take the same letter and I send it on the internet. Nobody calls, nobody checks, nobody bothers. And if you will, the transmission of the letter on the internet goes much further, much broader, for a much longer time than on hard print. We're going to face, I believe, sooner than later, the first major test as to how far our freedoms go, and it relates to the issue of anonymity. You've talked about the fact that we're 100 years old. And because we're 100 years old, I usually get the question, which maybe you will, you won't. Give me one thing that the Anti-Defamation League has done in the last 100 years, which is more significant than any other act that has changed the history of fighting hate. I say, I can't, but at the end of the day, of course I can. It may not be perfect. And the example that I've been using in the last year or so is legislation that we have helped enact Take yourself back for a moment, 1950s in the state of Georgia. It was in the height of the Ku Klux Klan violence and hatred. And we in the Anti-Defamation League in New York, in conjunction with some lawyers and some citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish and Jewish in the state of Georgia, came up with a law called the Anti-Mask Law. And basically what it said was, in the United States, the First Amendment guarantees you the right to be a bigot. You have a right to be a bigot. But if you're a bigot, you have to take responsibility for your bigotry. And so basically what the law stated was, if you want to march down the street with burning crosses and intimidating people, etc., take that mask off. And so all the great heroes of bigotry who under cover of a mask would during the day be businessmen, politicians, churchgoers, but once they can hide their identity were big chachamim and heroes in bigotry. Once you remove that, it began to break the back of the Klan. Now, I would say it's not an overstatement to say, fast forward 50 years later, and the mask is put on the bigot by virtue of the anonymity that is now provided for the bigot to travel the lanes of the internet globally. I believe that it will be probably the first push. Laws in the United States and Europe are different. In Europe, there are laws against anti-Semitism, racism, Holocaust denial, for all kinds of reasons. If you want to talk about the laws aren't effective, we don't have laws and it's better here. But the Jewish students, there was an incident of horrific anti-Semitism on Facebook. And the Jewish students in France sued to remove the anonymity, and they won. And I believe that's going to be the first push in terms of providing some civility into this new media of communication to protect citizens. You want to be a bigot? Fine. You want to communicate? Tell the world who you are. Because, Gary, when you and I get threats, many of the threats we don't know who they come from. We can go to law enforcement, they'll check it out, etc. But I think if the person threatening you or me or the institution knew that their name would be out there, I think it would have actually a chilling effect, which is fine if it has a chilling effect on hate.
So that's fascinating that, you know, the example you give, and it's a very telling example, is about legislation from the 1950s that was very effective. One of the themes of this new book that you cite a number of times in there is that legislation is not probably the best answer now, partly because of our great reverence for the First Amendment. And so I was going to ask you a little bit about when you say about pushing to chip away at that a little bit. Isn't that sacred ground? And also, what are the alternatives to legislation that can be effective?
Well, I think the preliminary step is to get the providers, the Yahoo, Amazons, the Googles, to take a little bit more responsibly their commitment to a civil society. All of you, if you bother to look at, sign an agreement of understanding, and there are conditions that are in your undertaking and in your contract. And the language is pretty good. I can read you, they have Facebook, for example.
That's where everybody just clicks agree and next.
Yeah, right. Hate speech is prohibited. This is Facebook and defined as content that, quote, attacks people based on their actual or perceived race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or disease. And Facebook differentiates between hate speech against individuals, not permitted, and hate speech against a group permitted. Now, I can read you, YouTube has similar, Google. So they have the makings of the ability to enforce the standards that you sign you will be abide for. And the problem is they don't. age difficult, it's expensive, we gotta prod them. Now, that's a vehicle for us because they don't want legislation. We may not want legislation for philosophical, historical reasons. They don't want legislation because it's a pain in the neck
business,
and it will
yeah.
interfere with the commerce and line. They also don't want regulations. So what we've been doing, and the question is how do you measure success, is we've been negotiating. You complain to us or somebody brings to our attention anti-Semitic, violent, racist, and we reach out to the providers. And what works for us is they know that if they don't respond, or they don't respond responsibly, down the line is legislation. And so it has basically worked in the sense that they will remove 60–70% of our complaints if we don't crow about it. More recently, something happened which shook up the industry even more. You remember a couple of months ago, there was almost an epidemic of misogynist hate stuff out there against women, horrific in its graphics and its content. And it so upset people and offended people, they were threatening boycotts unless the providers did something. All of a sudden, they woke up and found the rules and regulations in the contract. So I think we need to continue to push them to act in their best interest, our best interest, and police. Now, there are problems, and I'll go back to the Palm Beach Post. When Madoff, remember Madoff? When Madoff became news, the internet in the Palm Beach Post was swamped with anti-Semitic comments and letters. We went to the Palm Beach Post once and we complained. They said they'll see what they can do about it. We went the second time, they said they'll see what they can do about it. And the third time they issued a statement saying from here on in, the Palm Beach Post will no longer entertain letters on Madoff on internet. Well, in a way that was censorship. Something that we don't want, because we don't want to give them the authority to decide, nor do we want to impose it. But that was their quick hand response, because they didn't want more protests, they didn't want regulation, etc. Laws don't necessarily work unless you implement them, and this is the difference between the United States and Europe. Europe has legislation against hate speech, group hate speech, libel law. We have never been able to devise a constitutional group libel statute in this country, and I don't think we ever will. So they have legislation, and the anti-Semitism is greater, Holocaust denial is greater. We don't have legislation. It isn't. We're not totally immune, but it's lower. And that's because of the environment. And the environment is that in this country, there are consequences to racist acts and anti-Semitic expressions. Not foolproof, but 100%. So at the end of the day, I do think there may be some legislation removing the anonymity, but I don't think we'll get anywhere on the issue of freedom of speech. So the alternative is educate, alert, move people to write. You know, a lot of you are upset, offended by what you come across. Thanks for writing to us. But if you get it on your internet, write to the people you pay the bill. Tell them that you're offended. It's as significant, if not more significant, than we write. When we write, they worry it'll be the media. When you write, it means dollars and cents in terms of their business venture.
I think you make a really good point in the contrast how newspapers are very careful about editing and choosing letters to the editor that they publish as opposed to comments that they'll put online. I think part of it is, they showcase maybe 4, 5, 6 letters a day, so they're very careful about it. And, part of it is the volume of the internet. But I think it's a legitimate question that many of us deal with in media that have websites is, what do you do with comments? How much do you encourage people to write comments? I think many of them are people who otherwise would be calling talk shows. I mean, they don't have a lot to do during the day. And sometimes you'll see 50 comments on a Jerusalem Post story, and it's 3 people going back and forth. So I
Some
think,
people underread comments, they don't read the story.
right. So, in order to edit that, if you're really going to edit them, it's just a huge job in terms of manpower. So they have a lower standard. That's just the reality of it.
And what happened in Palm Beach Post, the only way they can deal with it is just take out. I want to go back to one more approach, which is the human approach. We've traveled and we've interacted with not only the corporations, but some of the gurus, some of the people who have developed the technology. You know some of them, they're celebrated in the media. And what we find is when you go to them and you say, for example, do you know that what you've created has the following unintended consequences? You log on the word Jew, and you get anti-Jew. You get anti-Semitism before you finally get to, after a while, to a decent definition of Jews or stories. You log on Holocaust, and you get anti-Holocaust. You get Holocaust denial. And their answer to us is algorithms. I said, all right, Shechiyanu, algorithms, wonderful. So what am I supposed to do with it? Well, I say, well, that's algorithms. Well, if you don't know what algorithms are, I've learned, and it means the way this technology works, it continuously assembles pro and con, and it decides which is pro and which is con. And to the extent that more people log on or send messages which are positive to Jews or negative to Jews, at every moment of time, when you press the word Jew, it will reflect what the communications, what the traffic is out there. Now, bigots operate 24/7. They've got nothing else to do. And so the bigotry overwhelms. You have Holocaust denial, the same thing. A student is given an assignment today to do a paper on the Shoah. It used to be they went to the library. The library had 100 books on the Shoah, 100 about what happened, 3 books, Holocaust denial, and a librarian. Today, that's gone. Today, they push the button, and what comes out is Holocaust denial without perspective. So when we came in, we said, hello, and they said, unintended consequences. And we said, no, that's not enough. You do have a responsibility. You need to continue into Genius to see if you can find antidotes. You can't just say this is what it is. By the way, they gave the Jewish community an antidote on the issue of Jew being, the wrong definition. Tell the Jewish community to Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv 3 times a day, go to the internet and say nice things about Jews. We got nothing else to do. By the way, it worked. It worked. There was a campaign for about 4 weeks where synagogues and Jewish centers went out there and said, you know what, let's try something. It did work, but it's meshuggah. This is. Now, so the other challenge is, they're good people. They're very creative, is to continue to challenge them that in their technology, in their creativity, in their brilliance, that they find a response and an antidote without doing damage to First Amendment. I will share with you, there are 2 temporary solutions we've found. Google, this is after negotiations, Google, when you search for Jew, there is today a special note regarding an organization, Jew Watch. So when you get it, something pops up and says Jews Watch is an anti-Semitic. Amazon, they now have a notice that we've provided under protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which basically says if somebody logs onto it, this is an anti-Semitic, da-da-da-da-da-da. So there is some effort to come across, but there's still a long, long way to go.
Do you tweet?
No.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to check.
Noch nicht.
Okay. So let's take a case. I mean, I think this would be very interesting. Let's say you learn of an anti-Semitic incident in New York City. What's sort of the thought process that goes into deciding, do we, as an example with, say, Google about an issue where you negotiate with the people involved, do you keep it quiet, do you broadcast it? What's sort of the determining factors when these issues come up? Obviously, you don't use the same approach to every incident, but just what's the thought process?
The answer is yes. All the above, depending on the circumstances in this situation. Look, to start with, the only weapon we have is our credibility. So that you have to weigh, first, the analysis, is it or isn't it? You need to be convinced that it is, then you have to bring it. Now, normally, usually, and I'd say normally, today it's no longer as normal, and that is to do it privately. If in our, I'll take one that's not anti-Semitic, but it's a much easier example. For us, it wasn't that easy for them. Somebody opened up a website, joined the Third Intifada. Okay. When attention came to us, we reached out to Facebook and we said, hello, this is not a dialogue club. What you are now hosting is an institution which is recruiting for violence against the men, women, and children of Israel. And for 2 weeks, we engaged in a debate and a dialogue. And they said, no, this is, people giving their idea. And we said, no, intifada means only one thing. There was a first intifada, it did so-and-so. The second intifada, it did so-and-so. The third intifada, what they're inviting to, is for violence against them. It took us 2 weeks to negotiate. And eventually they removed it. And then, of course, it came back, because it's like a whack-a-mole, it comes out in a different name and a different... So it was not our interest, although it went public, which is the other, when you say, how do you do things and why should you do them, a lot of that stuff, Gary, has disappeared. We've lost the ability sometimes to use seichel, to figure out what's best, because you've lost the luxury of wanting to engage in some dialogue, education, sensitivity, so it's not a big deal or a big event. And the reason it's more difficult today is because it's out there, and there's always somebody pushing it. I remember, not too long ago, I used to come to the office and ask, what's the calamity, what's the bruch of the day? Because we would come in and our fax machines would be overwhelmed by something that happened, and by the time you're able to reach out to a manufacturer or to an institution, they were in a bunker. In terms of what we deal with, in the good old days, somebody would write a nasty piece about ADL or Abe Foxman. And you would sit down, and you're talking, how do you make decisions? We would sit down, take a cheshbon hanefesh, and say, this person is nothing, nobody wants attention, not credible, forget it. Don't answer, don't engage. Today, it's changed. That means the reasonable, rational approach that we used to have is gone for us. Why? Because today, so-and-so writes a blog. We, in a classical, seichelic, credible way, would ignore it. In 2 weeks, it's global. Not only do your enemies have it, but your friends have it. And we get ADL supporters say, why don't you answer this idiot? Why don't you, So you've lost the ability. So a lot of the things that we used to do, and the approach usually with corporations is not to embarrass them. Is to see whether you can ameliorate, you can educate them, you can sensitize them quietly. It's much more difficult to do. Then sometimes is the issue of definition. It's like many, many, many years ago, when the internet really came to the fore, the issue was how do we protect the kids? All right, look, today with cyberbullying, the tragedies that are out there are horrific and global. But in the early days, how do you keep your kids from going to the Ku Klux Klan or the neo-Nazis? So we in the ADL developed a filter. And it didn't sell as a Hanukkah or a Christmas gift. All right, so the parents that we tried to sell it to their kids to hook in, but even there was a problem. What we did was we labeled hate groups, anti-Semitic groups, and then they were blocked from the internet. And when a kid would go to the Ku Klux Klan, it would say, stop. It would then revert them to say, the Ku Klux Klan is so-and-so, or the neo-Nazi group is so-and-so. But you know what? Even then, we got arguments. Who decided that you should decide what is and what isn't? Again, I think we're 100 years old. We have a certain level of credibility in terms of when we come and say it's anti-Semitism, sometimes Jews disagree. But you know what? Most of the time, you know, if you use it with seichel, with tact, it responds.
Jews disagree?
Yeah.
Wow. So closer to home, many of you are familiar with a very small group, a handful of people who have taken it upon themselves to have a website and talk about the JCC of Manhattan being anti-Israel. So this, you and I probably talked about it at the time. You know, what's the proper response for a newspaper? Do you write about it and they kind of thrive on the publicity, whether it's positive or not, or negative? And and this happens in other communities as well. So you can have three people have the kind of clout with their information being read by countless people anywhere in the world. And how do you counter that? I think, you know, one response is we're just going to ignore it. But as you say, it's more and more difficult to do that.
I think we've lost the total ability to control. And therefore, you have no choice but to respond, because it's not going to go away. And if you ignore it, you know, I guess there is an element where it's so mishuggah, so bizarre, that 90% of the people who look at it will say it's bizarre, but it doesn't happen that way. When somebody attacks me, and I always pray that it should be as mishuggah, as extreme as could be. Because if it's moderate, well, maybe, you know. No, but I think, Gary, I think we've lost the ability to be totally in control of what makes sense for us and forced to deal with the marketplace, because the marketplace now provides these superhighways. And we don't have, I would say today, the luxury to ignore. The other thing is, we complained recently about, say, Joan Rivers, one of her jokes, okay, horrific jokes about the Shoah. And, you know, our request from NBC was not only that she apologized, but they remove it from history because that clip is going to haunt us 20, 30 years from now. Which again, so therefore when you think in the good old days we would say, you know, you ignore this extremist, etc. You almost can't, because 20 years from now it will say, so-and-so said so-and-so about the prime minister, and nobody stood up. Not the Jewish community, not in Israel. So yeah, it's part of the new world.
There's been a lot of attention in the last week or so, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more going forward on this new study done by the Pew Center on American Jewish identity. It's the first major extensive study of American Jewish identity. They interviewed about 3,500 people, and it's about 250-page study. I have not read all of it, but some of the highlights that we've been writing about, others have been writing about, are pretty bleak about looking at the American Jewish community in terms of sustainability or survival as we know it, with one of the statistics is that 22% of American Jews now say they have no religion. A large increase in interfaith marriage, a large increase of people who say they're not raising their kids as Jews, on and on. There's also some positive report. I think more people say they're supportive of Israel, who have been to Israel, than perhaps people thought. But I guess my question to you is, when you look at that kind of material and you're thinking about, more narrowly about the ADL and more widely in terms of how we not only sustain ourselves but continue to have an impact, what do you make of it? What do you do with it?
Okay, a couple of things. I didn't read the study. I read some of the headlines. I found it interesting that already in the week, I've read all kinds of spins. It's good for the Jews, it's bad for the Jews, it's good for Israel, it's bad for Israel. So that everybody has been spinning it to reinforce whatever their little niche is. So the more I've been reading this week is there are very few surprises out there. There's nothing really we didn't know, there's nothing new and nothing dramatically shocking, that it just reinforces some. Having said that, I am an apikoros, what's the English word?
A heretic.
I'm a heretic on sociological predictions. In 1965, when I came to work for the American Jewish community, I came to work for the Anti-Defamation League as a good student and very, involved. I studied every sociological survey in 1965 that I could put my hands on to understand, where am I running? Where I'm going to go into the Jewish community, I'm giving up the law. Where am I heading? What kind of a future will I have? And I have to tell you, I don't think I read one sociological prognosis that predicted that the American Jewish community would be around in the year 2000. It was all Malthusian. We're going to disappear because of this, and we're going to disappear because of that, and we're going to disappear because... And you know what? So we're in 2013, and we're still doing magnificent surveys of who we are and where we are and what we want to be and how much we are. And, in the last, 30 years, there's been a Soviet Jewish Aliyah. There's been an Israeli Yerida. There is more struggling today. Take the internet. There are more variations of being Jewish and being involved in Jewishness. Some on a Spitzkoppel, some very little, some a lot. There's creative Judaism where so I don't, I learned not to accept it then, and I'm not accepting now. Having said it, I've today asked our staff to go on a one-day retreat because your question is legitimate. And I want to study. I want us to study, what does it mean? How real is it? How serious is it? And then it's important for us to know what the American Jewish community is, but I will share with you a secret of the ADL. We're a Jewish organization working for the Jewish people, but our job is the non-Jewish world. That means if you take a look at whatever we do, whether it's fighting anti-Semitism, it's a disease of the non-Jewish mind. Whether it's fighting prejudice, it's out there. So that most of what we do is reaching out to change the environment for Jews to be safely Jews. Now, I have a very personal dilemma. I was, after being Catholic, I was raised Jewish, very much Jewish. I went to yeshiva, I went to day school, so there was no question for me what is. I never had those issues. My personal philosophical dilemma is, I've spent my whole adult life in an institution whose major purpose is to open up American society for Jews. to make it possible for them to live where they want, travel where they want, study where they want, do what they want, marry who they want, okay? Maybe we've been too successful. Maybe we've been too successful. But on the other hand, that's the true challenge of Yiddishkeit. And that is not because you're going to be a Jew because they don't want you to be nothing else, because they close the doors, because et cetera. And I think this is still an experiment. The American Jewish historical experience is unique in world Jewish history. And even that element of this struggle of Jews, how they want to be Jews, do they want to be Jews, to what extent? And finally, you know more than most people, Jewish life has never survived beyond the Ma'aser. The Jewish people historically have survived because at all times, in all places in history, there was a Ma'aser, there was a tenth. 1/10 of our people kept Jews and Judaism alive. We're much better than 1/10 today. So I continue to be an optimist because I see efforts struggling with our Jewishness. I don't know how people define themselves. There is a statistics I don't know if you saw. 96% of quote-unquote American Jews feel a pride about being Jewish. Hello, if nothing else came out of Pew, that's pretty good.
So do you sort of just dismiss the report, or what do you look for that's helpful to you?
I don't dismiss it, which is why I've reached out to Pew to give us one of their scholars. We're going to spend the day with our senior staff to understand it better. Because, no, you can't ignore it. But you know, again, I don't think it's doom and gloom. Look, we have issues. We have issues of intermarriage. It's not only the question that there is intermarriage. How do we deal with intermarriage? You've written about it. We are not dealing with it. So the issues we know, it's not going to get better. How much of a return is it? How do we deal with kiruv? Who deals with kiruv or bringing back? No, I don't dismiss it. But I would say basically from the ADL, the only way we're going to change our form of business is if anti-Semitism disappears, if hate disappears, if anti-Israel disappears. You know what? Then you won't need us, and then let other people worry about the creative, positive aspects of Jewish life. Our job is to make the environment in this country and beyond as user-friendly as possible for Jews who want to be Jews in a manner that they want to be. That's what I see our mission. That's our mission. Make the environment as user-friendly for American Jews primarily, but beyond, to be able to live as Jewish or non-Jewish as they want. That's our goal. Now, there are other job responsibilities in this community. You have a role, because you educate, you enlighten, etc. The rabbinate has a job. The schools have a job in terms of how Israel has a job. So our job, unfortunately, will continue regardless of what the interpretations of Pew are, because unfortunately, my grandchildren are going to still live with anti-Semitism and prejudice, probably more than we have.
Right. You gave the example when from the 60s, mid-60s, when you started at the ADL about reading the reports. I'm pretty sure it was right around then that Look magazine did a cover story on the disappearing American Jews in the mid-60s. Of course, the Look magazine disappeared. We're still here. And I guess, look, we're in an Orthodox synagogue this evening, and I think many of us take for granted when we look at these studies, and actually we wrote an editorial about this in tomorrow's paper, that all these surveys tend to separate out the Orthodox community. They'll say, in the non-Orthodox community, this is the rate of assimilation, intermarriage, and they'll have a little asterisk and say, it doesn't apply to the Orthodox community. I think one of the good pieces
one of the good pieces of
information is about the strength of the Orthodox Jewish community, particularly among younger people. I looked at this graph today. The retention rate of people who are raised Orthodox, the highest retention rate is for people 18 to 29, who 83% are in the Orthodox community, probably. Whether it's about the lesson we take is about day schools or about the family and the environment, about sending kids to Israel. There's plenty to look at.
I haven't looked at Pew, but I don't know. If you ask me, has there been a change in college campus, Jews on campus is a very, very traumatic issue for American Jews, parents, grandparents.
Do you think that's accurate?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay? I go back, I'm a little older than you. I remember the 60s. And the 60s were hell being Jewish, pro-Israel. It was anti-war, it was SNCC, CORE, Black Panthers. It was no Metzia in City College or Columbia, being Jewish, publicly Jewish, supporting Israel. Throughout the years, there have been 25 to 50 campuses in the United States that have been anti-Israel from time to time. They haven't changed. There are 3,500 campuses in the United States. So 25 to 50 have activism against Israel. Okay, it's pretty bad from time to time. But I'm not sure where Pew now touches on. There are more efforts today from the organized Jewish community to provide knowledge, services to the Jewish kids on campus than ever in history. There's a global coalition of Jewish organizations to clear who does what when. They stand with us and sit with us and sleep with us. God bless it, in terms of Israel. So that's number one. There's more resources, more. But number two, I'm not sure that you will find in Pew something that is of the last 5-10 years, which is Birthright. I went to Israel the first time in 1958. I went on what was then called Machon HaKayitz Summer Institute. I went in 60 and 61. In the last 40 years, traveling around the United States, what I meet are the graduates of the summer institutes of 58, 60, and 61. They're in synagogues, in JCCs, in Jewish institutions. We now have on the college campus and beyond 300,000 to 400,000 Jewish kids who are now young adults who have graduated Taglit Birthright. That's going to make a tremendous difference in the next 5, 10, 15 years of the Jewish community. Not every kid who goes to Israel for 10 days comes back a Zionist. But I guarantee you, 1 out of 3 do. It's already indicated a difference in marriage and intermarriage. 1 out of 3 won't care, and the other third will be a lot different. I see, and you know what? The waiting list for Jewish students on college age wanting to go to Israel, it's a huge waiting list. They've just extended the age because kids after 26 says it's not fair. So, how does Pew measure that wait list, that desire, that impact? I don't think it's in there. But things won't happen by themselves. We're going to have to invest in them. We have to figure a way, how do we bring them into the community? But they are already different in terms of the quotient of their Jewish identity, their Jewish being.
What keeps you up at night? I mean, what are the primary issues that worry you about the future? Besides heartburn.
I worry. The good news and the bad news. The good news is the majority of the Jewish people today live in the sovereign state of Israel. That's a great achievement in Jewish history, in Jewish hopes and dreams and rebirth and reincarnation of our people, that we finally achieved that the majority of Jews today live in Eretz Yisrael and Medinas Yisrael. Israel is today in a more precarious situation that it's been for all the years that I remember. And I'm old enough, 48, I was there, but I remember we danced, so I didn't know before 48. But I was there in 67, I was there in 73, before and during, and I've been there through several wars. And yeah, we were anxious and we worried, but it was never such a dark cloud. The neighborhood has gotten much, much worse. It's not been good, but it's hideous today. And you have a country, Iran, which proclaims that it wants the destruction of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And they are going after nuclear weapons. And the world is not much better, hasn't learned very much, and I hope we have learned. And yeah, that keeps me up nights. I don't know how you feel about this administration and this president and the relationship. We need to remember that in the whole wide world, for Israel, there's nobody else but the United States. That's the good news and the bad news. And that's a haunting reality. Some of you have luxuries. You don't like the president, you like him, you this. At the end of the day, the nightmare to me is there's nobody anywhere else in the world that Israel and the Jewish people, b'shat hadchak, at a moment of crisis, can turn to. And if you think back to the wars, if it wasn't for the United States, and there weren't always great relationships, Israel didn't know after the third day of the war if it had munitions to fight the war. Europeans wouldn't permit American planes to land and to refuel. And that's as recent as the last war. So what keeps me up at night is this dependency, how smart Israel's leadership is and will be, how smart we will be. And Gary, you and I have talked, the one thing we as a Jewish people here cannot afford is to play politics with Israel. We can't play politics here about Israel because there are no options. There's only one. Now, some of the good news is the military intelligence relationship is better than it's ever been to our knowledge. But we also know that the interests are different, very much different. That the interests and the threats are different for this country and for Israel. And that's what keeps me up at night, because at the end of the day, I know the Prime Minister proudly said, if we have to, we will stand alone. And there's no question in my mind that at the end of the day, if Israel feels that it has to act, it will stand alone because it has to defend. But it cannot stand alone for long. And that's, to me, that's what keeps me up. Israel can deal with its issues, but it cannot, in the long run, deal alone. And that's why what we do and how we do it here is so critical.
It was pointed out to me the other day after Prime Minister Netanyahu gave his speech at the United Nations and used that phrase that if necessary, Israel will stand alone. It was an echo to 1967 when Levi Eshkol was then the Prime Minister, and Lyndon Johnson apparently said to him, I don't know if it was privately or not, obviously it must have been privately, if you take preemptive measures against the Arab states, that you will stand alone. So I guess that was part of why they used the phrase.
That's the haunting.
Yeah.
I'll give you, when Ariel Sharon became Prime Minister of Israel, we've had a relationship previously. I got a call saying, come and visit, we'll schmooze. And I came into the office, closed the door, and he says, do you have any advice for me? And I said, down, okay. But I said, yeah, I have one piece of advice for you. Arik Sharon, before he became prime minister, traveled to the post-Soviet Union and tried to interest the Russians to become Israel's ally, to compete with the Americans. It didn't sell, so I said to him, Mr. Prime Minister, the one thing you need to do is to convince the Americans that you weren't serious on your trips to Moscow to try to get them to be your allies. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Israel's security, Israel's bitachon is based on two pillars. Tzva Haganah Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, is one, and the United States of America as two. And then he chuckled and he said, and you know, even the first is dependent on the second. And that's, again, a very haunting reality when we look to the future and the instability and Iran down the road.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.